Hello and welcome back to HEMAFightBreakdowns. Today I'm going to be doing the bronze medal match for Battleborn between Tarzi and Dashiell Harrison. This is another interesting match, particularly the theme of this one is going to be attack versus counterattack. And also another interesting fact is that there's going to be another left-hander in this fight, which means that 3 out of the 4 people who are in the bronze and gold medal match were left-handed. So a whole lot of great lefty representation here. So when we get into this fight, there's going to be a lot of interesting tidbits and adaptations, specifically as it pertains to what you do when someone else has an opposite lead leg forward and lead hand forward, and the kinds of things that you can and cannot do in order to try to deal with that. Now, our first exchange is going to be very emblematic of the overall fight, and as I said in the beginning, there's going to be a lot of attack, counterattack. And what we see here is that when you are on the left side here, you are left-handed, and the kinds of openings that you have for your first intentions are completely different than if you would be normally facing a right-hander. Basically, when you are left-handed and you're fencing a right-hander, their lead hand, their lead leg, their lead shoulder is well within your grasp, and at the exact same time, so is yours to them. The problem is that as a right-handed fencer, most people have essentially trained themselves to never attack down their own dominant line because they have gotten so used to being interrupted and zorned and going into binds from that direction because they're used to fencing other right-handers. As a result, their own dominant line can often feel a little bit neglected. Meanwhile, as a left-hander, your dominant line is just the most oppressive thing of all time, because not only are you coming in behind a right-hander's dominant line, but you're doing so to targets that they're normally not used to defending. When you are a right-hander and you have your right leg and right hand forward, defending your right side might seem easy, but it's actually quite difficult, because in order to sweep your blade across your body, you have to start on your right side and go a little bit out further. This kind of action feels very unnatural to a lot of right-handed fencers because it feels like an over parry. As a result, you're going to see a lot of exchanges like this one, where someone attacks into a line that clearly the opposing person doesn't necessarily have a lot of experience defending, and as a result, they will usually do a pretty good job of defending it, but then their repost might come along a more, typical line that they're used to throwing, a typical line that doesn't necessarily work out for them in the same way that it normally would. So specifically in this exchange, we see fighter on the left throw a little attack towards the hand. It gets parried by fencer on the right. But then the second they go in for their follow-up attack, they find that things just aren't working out the way they normally would. They go high for the head. The opposing fencer kind of just leans out of the way, but then simultaneously hits them in the leg as they leave. Fencer on the right here basically had their entire concept of distance and timing thrown away, because normally against another right-handed fencer, that leg wouldn't have been really in measure or easy to hit, and most importantly, their follow-up probably would have landed to the head more normally, but this time, because the other person is left-handed, they ended up on the inside of the guard and maybe getting a little bit of a shot that they just didn't expect. Now, against my better judgment, I am going to leave this second exchange in, partially because there's only really 5 exchanges I'm going to want to cover in this first fight, and also because at the end of the day, while the judge pretty much gets in front of the entire shot, you can still see the really important stuff. What happens in this exchange is basically the inverse of the last exchange. Fighter on the right is the one who comes in. They throw on their offside, again, an important detail because people who are right-handed are very used to throwing along that line. It gets parried by a fencer on the left, and then there is an exchange of reposts. But the important thing to understand here is that one of the reasons this exchange kind of ends in a little bit of a double is because fencer on the left, who is left-handed, in their own mind, covered their most dominant line and then reasserts the line that they already have, going from a parry on their left side to kind of like a thrust. At the exact same time, though, the fencer on the right has just thrown something on their offside, and they're very, very used to, obviously, people not reasserting that line, because people who are right-handed generally don't reassert a line that isn't their dominant line. It doesn't feel comfortable. It doesn't feel strong. And so, as a result, instead of respecting the fact that he got parried, he kind of goes in for another cheeky little follow-up shot and finds that his opponent is wide open in the area that he is just standing in. So we have these kinds of interactions because right-handed versus left-handed fencing often is extremely confusing from the perspective of both fencers because, again, most of the time, each of these people has kind of an expectation on how they want an exchange to go. But the fact that completely different parts of the opponent's body are open or closed is throwing a monkey wrench into those plans, and it's basically causing people to revert to a much more basic understanding of fencing. So, again, this is resulting in a double, a little bit of a thrust from the fencer on the left, and a little bit of a cut from the fencer on the right. But the reason this really happened in my mind is because neither fencer clearly has a ton of experience in what to do against someone who is basically been pulled out of their element by a left versus right-handed fencing exchange. Next up, we have another attack, counterattack directly into a double kind of exchange. But this one, I think, is a good opportunity to talk about the dominant line of the left-handed fencer and one of the ways that it can be so very difficult to stay safe while attacking as a right-handed fencer into that. So as I stated earlier, if you're left-handed, you're always going to be on the outside line of the right-handed fencer, and protecting your right side when you're already right-handed is a little bit weird. In this particular instance, we also see another element to this, which is that certain targets are much more easily accessed, namely the body, than they normally would be as long as your right leg is also forward on top of being right-handed. In my mind, one of the best things to do if you are a right-handed fencer going against a left-handed fencer, maybe for the first time or just maybe for the first time in competition, is to pull your right leg back. And the reason for this is that it helps open up the lines, or more specifically close off some of the easily accessed lines that the left-handed fencer has access to. As we see in this exchange, there is another attack, there is another parry, and then both fencers go in for attack along the exact same line. The right-hander throws an attack on their right side down the dominant line, the left-hander throws an attack on their dominant side down the left side line, and no point can these blades really meet with each other until they've already reached their target. It's very difficult to do good Germanic style longsword fencing when there is no reason for the blades' path of travel to interact or intersect with one another. As a result of this, by pulling back your right leg, you're at the very least forcing your left-handed opponent to go a little bit deeper for some of their most common targets, and more specifically, it's going to pull your hands back a little bit, which is going to help you with those parries on your right side. At the exact same time, though, this left-handed person is doing everything that they really should do. They maybe just need to go for the hands a little bit more and back up a little bit more, but as a left-handed fencer, this is really the things that you need to be doing because you need to assert the fact that you have this outside line. You can always come in behind your opponent's strikes and get some really complicated and really tricky bind mechanics that is going to put any right-handed fencer on their back foot. So for our fourth exchange, we're going to have another very basic interaction. Fencer on the left is going to go for a hand shot, makes it. Fencer on the right tries to throw an after blow after their failed parry, but they don't quite make it in time because Fencer on the left is already too far away and manages to block it. So, ideal situation for Fencer on the left here. As a left-handed fencer, this is what you really should be trying to do pretty much every single time. You want to hit your best target, your closest target, and then you want to take advantage of the fact that a right-handed person has a really hard time blocking there, and then to start moving out of range as quickly as you can to make sure that any afterblow just basically has no chance of reaching you. But from the right-handed perspective, what really went wrong here was the type of parry that Fencer on the right tried to use. In a way, they basically transitioned from their right plow, which is where they're standing with their right leg forward, into almost a kind of right Von Tog. They basically take their hands and put them all the way up to the level of their shoulders. And the idea of a parry like this is it's almost a kind of wind. You're basically moving your sword from a plow to a ox or something like that, at least in order to make sure that the strong of your blade is right in between your opponent's sword and your biggest, highest priority targets. This, of course, is a little bit of a problem because in doing so, you expose your hands even more than they already were, and in this case, they got hit. So what really should be happening instead here is that instead of standing in a right plow, what should probably happen is that Fencer on the right should be standing in a right Sprech fencer, meaning that, as I said before, they should pull that right leg back. But even if they don't want to do that, sitting in a thumb grip with the Quillian sitting out to the side horizontally is going to do wonders for protecting the left-handed fencer's most desired target, that little spot between your wrist and your elbow. That is what those cross guards are best at defending, and if you get them in the path of your opponent's target, you're going to have a much better time because you're not going to have to be trying to do these almost Fiore-style short-edge deflection parries on a technique that, from a left-handed perspective, is super short, super precise, and very easily timed. So we come now to the final exchange of the first round. Again, as I talked about in the previous Battleborn video, this tournament did a really cool thing, which is get their finalists to fence 2 back-to-back, or at least a best of 3 of matches, in order to really determine who was better at adapting to their opponent, which is obviously something that I'm a fan of. But in this case, we come to the end of the first round, and this is where, in my mind, both of these fencers really needed to get that download on their opponent, and where the right-handed fencer really need to come to a good understanding of what kind of left-handed stuff was going to be coming at him. And if you really want a little bit of spoilers, fencer on the right does a much better job in the second fight of dealing with this stuff. I really just wanted to focus on this first fight because I believe it is the most illuminating in terms of how left-handed versus right-handed fencers and fencing matches tend to really go, at least in the very beginning if you're not used to it. So for our final little exchange, we have another little bit of a double. We have fencer on the left coming in, although thanks to the little bit of the camera movement, he's now just the one closest to the camera. Goes in, feints a kind of thrust or a kind of cut, and then throws an Unterhau on their left side, their dominant side, up into the armpit of their opponent. At the exact same time as this is happening, the fencer on the right, who is now furthest from the camera, recognizes the feint and immediately throws a left side Oberhau of their own straight towards the head of their opponent. And of course, when someone throws an attack on their left and the opponent throws an attack on their left, never shall the fencing swords actually meet, meaning that there was absolutely no hope of defense on either person's side. They both go straight to their target, land exactly as they want to, only to be hit by their opponent's attack at the exact same time. So, just like I've been saying this entire time, this happens when people who have a dominant line get used to not attacking on their dominant line, aka the right-handed fencer, and the left-handed fencer gets to attack on their dominant line all day long, every single day, because it feels the most comfortable, it's the longest range, it's the most efficient. What you really have to get used to, again, is that as the right-handed fencer, to break that habit you have ingrained in yourself of never going down your own dominant line. It might seem counterintuitive, but if you don't get used to it, at the end of the day, when you fence your first left-handed fencer, or even your 10th left-handed fencer, you're going to be in this situation all the time where you're constantly leaving yourself open on your right side because you are never used to it being attacked. Then, of course, that left-handed fencer who attacks almost exclusively on your right side is going to absolutely pick you apart. If your response to someone who is picking you apart on your outside line is to then move to your own outside line, well, this is what's going to happen. You're going to double almost every single exchange because there's no chance of you hitting and then covering or covering and then hitting because you're on opposite sides of the body from where your opponent is actually going. So, we had a little bit of a messy one. I know the second fight probably would have been better to actually watch in terms of a fight, but I do think it's important sometimes to watch these messier, less complicated fights because it really helps demonstrate that even super high-level fencers can have problems in the same way that other kinds of fencers can have, and most importantly, that at the end of the day, no matter how good you think you are, there's probably a left-handed fencer out there who could completely screw with your brain, and if you don't have a flowchart, if you don't have some tools in your tool belt for dealing with left-handed fencers, this is what's going to happen to you. You're going to find that all of your tools, all of your plans, all of your techniques are just not working the way they're supposed to. And if you don't know how to adapt to it, you're going to end up looking like a little bit of a bashy, doubly fencer, which you probably aren't most of the time. So hopefully you can learn something from this. If you want to see more videos like this, I'll be back next week, and I hope to see you next time.